the thought of having to delegate and what all that means is actually scarier for us. So we're sort of saying that it's because our teams aren't ready. But there's actually more going on there.
Welcome to the Managing Made Simple podcast, where you get a masterclass in managing your team with ease in 15 minutes or less. I'm Lia Garvin, your host and team operations consultant. Through this show and my programs with small businesses and corporate teams, I condense a decade of experience driving team operations in some of the most influential companies in tech into strategies to save you time, money, and most of all, stress. Doesn't matter if you're a business owner who realized that running a team isn't as easy as you thought it would be, are a new manager learning the ropes, or are a seasoned manager ready to up their game. Everyone is welcome to hang out with Managing Made Simple. From conflicts to feedback to delegating and more, we leave no stone unturned when it comes to what makes us love managing, kind of hate it, and everything in between. Let's go.
Welcome back to the show. Yesterday, I was running a manager workshop, and whenever I run these, I always get so much good stuff to talk about on the show. And one thing in particular that came up in this workshop, which was for, I would say, mid-level and senior level managers within a large corporate company. The thing that came up for folks was feeling like they are so buried in work, their team members are so buried, and they want to protect them from taking on more. So that's why they're not delegating. And that is why this episode is called, Are You Protecting Your Team or Are You Actually Afraid of Delegating? Because I absolutely love the sentiment of wanting to protect our teams, of not wanting to burn folks out. I love it. I mean, that's awesome. Like, we want to bring that care and consideration and compassion and all of that to our teams. Absolutely. And who knew there'd be more? And a lot of times I've found that, yes, while we don't want to burn our team members out, the thought of having to delegate and what all that means is actually scarier for us. So we're sort of saying that it's because our teams aren't ready. But there's actually more going on there. And when I talked to managers about this and what I heard in the workshop yesterday as folks were sharing, a lot of the reasons they weren't letting go of work were things like, well, there's just too much context to set. I have to go to 8 different meetings to get all the different details in order to be able to kind of connect the dots and know what my team members have to do. So I wouldn't be able to offload all of that, right? Another thing that came up was, well, I just don't have time to spell everything out to run an effective handoff. I would love to do that, but when am I even going to stop and even figure out what that would be? Another is, well, I have some team members that I'd like to, have take on more, but they're newer and I don't know if they're ready or what if they mess it up or this thing is too high stakes and I just can't let go of this one. Now, as you listen to those 3 things, right? Too much context is set. I don't have time to delegate or like my team member's not ready. None of those are actually protecting the team of burning out, right? They're not. They're really valid reasons, but they're not about protecting the team from getting overloaded. And the reason I want to talk about this today is I want us to tease those 2 things apart because they have different solutions behind them. Again, they're all valid, right? I'm not saying, oh, this is a BS excuse. No. Okay, but that's about you, not the team member's readiness. So the first one, too much context is set, is thinking about, there are times when a ton of context is needed. And then there's times when we wish someone had all the institutional knowledge that we had. But if we really thought about it, how much would be okay to go without, right? Like, do they need every little detail? I'm guessing there's actually a gradient there. There is, or a spectrum, whatever you want to call it. There is some context that will be great, but they don't have to have all of it. And so I think the question to ask ourselves there is, what is the right level of context to set? Could someone shadow me a few meetings, kind of see how these run, something like that, in order to let it go? Because no, they aren't going to be you. Now, business owners listening to this, they're never going to have all of the context that you have, right? But I would challenge you to think about, well, is there a little bit of the context that I can set that's sufficient, right? Not for all situations, but maybe there are some, right? So that's kind of how we overcome that obstacle. Now, it can turn into overburdening your team if you're like, well, yeah, they need to take this on and now they have to take on these 8 other meetings every week to be able to go to this. Then I'd have a conversation with your team about load balancing, right? And then that becomes, okay, this is something that is going to be part of your job to take on now. Let's look at everything else on. Let's talk about priorities and trade-offs. And that's a different conversation. And I think if you framed this new opportunity in terms of a career goal your team member has or a visibility opportunity or some kind of leadership potential, something like that, then they'll be excited about it, right? And then you also need a load balance. You don't want to just, whenever we talk about team capacity, It's a math equation. There's this many hours in a day, this many days in a week, and how much can we get done in that time frame? When something doesn't fit in that, it's not a, oh God, am I overburdening people or not? It's what fits, what doesn't, and what do we do with the stuff that's below the cut line? That's a very different conversation. A lot of times we have that with a lot of emotion tied to it, a lot of fear. If we think about it like a math equation, it becomes much easier. And I can share how to do this in a one-on-one or in one of my coaching sessions, whatever it looks like, because I think there can be a lot of resistance around that. But I'll say the headline, the bottom line or whatever is to have a conversation about capacity and trade-offs. And then it becomes less emotional, like, oh, I couldn't handle this, or, my team member is not ready or whatever like that. Now, when we think about our own ability to delegate and to slow down, and we feel like, well, I don't want to throw this over the fence, but really it's actually, I don't have time to be thinking about it. I would challenge you. I talk a lot about delegating, and I have a lot of episodes about it and setting expectations. I want to offer you another tool, which is to always be thinking about how can I be documenting things as I go, writing down steps as I go, and optimizing my workflow as I go so that when the time is right, I can hand something off easily.
Did you know that I do team workshops on all of the stuff that I talk about on this show with large companies like Google and also with startups and small businesses like marketing agencies, law firms, and med spas? Whether it's making those feedback conversations a little less awkward, how to support your team through all of the change and uncertainty making us all, well, a little on edge right now, or delegating to empower your team to step up as owners. I come into your teams and give you the tools you need to wrestle with all this tough stuff and feel like you've got it handled. Reach out at hello@liagarvin.com or pass my info along to the decision maker in your company, and let's make all this team stuff easier and a lot more fun.
So for example, if you do something on a regular basis, let's say you run a certain kind of meeting that requires some kind of pulling together logistics, or you have a certain kind of client that there's some nuances of how you communicate with them. Or you run a kind of, in product teams, there's a launch review and you review certain things in a checklist, and certain things emails have to go to different people, or approvals have to be made. When you're in that situation, to be writing down like, oh, okay, here's kind of how I'm handling this, so that again, you are logging things as you go and you're not having to explain a million different things if you want to hand it off. For example, back when I was working in YouTube, I was running a launch review where we had to review designs before they were in the actual product. So we'd look at the different screens, we'd make sure it was working, and then we would file bugs. Like if there was issues, we would send the issues to the engineering team. And if we were ready to go, we would approve it. Now, when I took on that process, it felt very complicated. We had to bring all these different people together. We had to get devices set up. We had to get, we had to write in the bugs and everything that had to go to different people that we had reviewed again. But what I started to do was every single week in that meeting, start to write down, okay, what's actually the macro themes here? What information goes to what person? How can we simplify this, make it easier? So that when it was time to hand that meeting off and have one of my team members run it, it was a very simple and clear process. It didn't start that way. It did take a little time to wrangle it and simplify it and figure it out. But then when I was ready to hand it off, I had already done that legwork. So it didn't take like 3 weeks to hand off this 30-minute meeting. Now there's another one, right? We're saying, what if they mess up? What if my team member can't cut it? This thing is too important. So I'd say that's another thing that's on a spectrum, right? Like there are certain things that, a new team member that's been there a couple weeks, maybe they shouldn't take that on. Okay. But when we hire people, we should, from day one, maybe even before, start to be building trust with them so that they can take things on independently, right? That is in most roles, I think that will be the goal, right? So to think about, is this something that, what's the probability of them messing up? What are they actually taking on that we could be mitigating with different things like having more frequent check-ins, or having a checklist of what they have to do, or having a final review before something happens? There are steps that we can take to mitigate risk so the person isn't just going out on a limb and figuring out themselves. And that's where setting expectations and having frequent check-ins comes into play. Doing that all up front, right? So we're not micromanaging, because when we set that up front, it's not micromanaging. When we correct later and all the time after, like little nuanced, little correcty things here and there, that's when it feels like it. So when we're worried about someone messing up, that equals a trust thing. You're not a bad person if you don't trust your team member right away. But if you think they can't handle something, you inherently do not trust them to do that thing. So the question again is not about, I don't want to overburden them, I don't want to protect them. It's actually, okay, how can I build trust with this person? How long do I need? What do I need to see them deliver on? What do I need to know to feel confident? What do I need to hear from peers or colleagues to know that, right? Whatever that looks like. And I would say, go through that list in your mind, say, are these things all reasonable? Are all of these required in order to be able to hand this off? Maybe some of them are, and maybe some of them aren't. And to figure out, okay, this is the top 3, 5 things, whatever, that I need to see to be able to trust that person. And let me go do that so that finally when I am getting to a place where, that person can take more on, or they've been on the team a little longer, I've seen some of their work, then I can delegate it. So I think it is a fantastic perspective to not want to overload your team members, to not want to burn them out, to not want to throw work under the fence, to recognize, hey, we're all spread really thin and I don't want to be the person that adds one more thing. Love that. It's a yes and. And there are times when I think we use the framing of, I don't want to overburden them, when it's actually some shifts that we could make as leaders to be able to create some space to hand things off. It's not an either or, it's not an either or. It's looking at, hey, what are the potential reasons that I'm hesitating letting go of this thing? And one more point on adding things to someone's plate. This is why expectation setting comes into place so much, because sometimes we ask a team member to take something on and they say, no, I have so much on my plate. Like, how am I supposed to do that? No way. And we haven't set expectations and we haven't actually scoped what this work would be. So they think it's this enormous thing. And maybe we actually think it's a small thing. And there's a disconnect. And we're like, God, well, they're always saying no. How could I ask them to do one more thing? So I would suggest when you're going to introduce any additional work, when someone has already at capacity, so to speak, to come in there and say, hey, let's have a conversation around load balancing. There's a couple things that are some new interesting projects. I'd like to see if they fit. Let's look at what, overall bandwidth looks like. Let's look at how to load balance, what's in, what's out, how long these things should take. For these new projects, I'll first kind of set some expectations on what work's entailed and what success looks like. So you come in like a dialogue, not forward an email and say, please do this. And then you're going to have a way better sense of if it's doable or not. And so that's really the framing I would bring it's let's have a conversation about workload. There's some new stuff coming. I understand you're at capacity. Let's figure out how to make it all work. Okay. So then your team member doesn't feel afraid. They're not on the defense. They're not like, oh, here we go again. But they say, oh, and that's where you can introduce some of those things like, hey, in this one specifically, this connects directly to that goal that you have. So feels like we should prioritize this one and maybe deprioritize this set of work. All right. So this is how we discern between, am I protecting my team or am I actually just afraid of delegating? And again, it's not an either or, but when we deploy these different strategies and we try to really think critically and actually examine our own resistance, we start to figure out really how to best support our team and how to get ourselves out of the weeds, which is one of the most important things we can do as a leader so that we can scale, we can grow our team, grow our business, grow our company, and get whatever we need to do done. See you next time.
That's all I have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Managing Made Simple podcast, where my goal is to demystify the job of people management so that together we can make the workplace somewhere everyone can thrive. With that said, let's spread the word. If you love this episode, please pass it along to someone who might benefit from it. See you next time.